Greetings everyone. It's been quite a while since I've made a video, so please bear with me. I've given myself a May 14th deadline, so what you see is what you get. No more research, no more polishing. I just gotta get her done. Today we're going to have a look at Saint Corona. Who is Saint Corona? Who is she, and why is her story relevant to us today? Many of you probably heard of her last year when she was the subject of a media blitz about the same time as the global lockdowns were being put in place. The media assured us, however, that her name, Corona, being the same as the coronavirus, was a complete coincidence. I beg to differ. The veneration of Corona and her co-martyr, Victor, is complex and varied, and this video will simply serve as an introduction. But I believe in their shared iconography we see the perfect marriage of banking and plague, weaponized plague, or plague capitalism, if you will. It's always about money, and today we see how this perceived plague is leading us to a complete economic reset. So, just a brief introduction. Victor was a Christian soldier serving in Syria. During the persecution of Marcus Aurelius, he was denounced and subjected to torture. From the crowd of spectators, Corona, a 16-year-old wife of a soldier, shouted that Victor was a lucky man because of his constancy. I see descending from heaven 2 crowns, one for Victor and one for myself. She was arrested and bound between 2 palms, bent down to the ground. By untying the trees, Corona was torn apart. Victor had his eyes gouged out and was then beheaded. Most sources state that he and Corona were killed in Roman Syria during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, around the 160s or 170s AD. But various hagiographical texts disagree about the site of their martyrdom. The Greek Passio states that it was Damascus, while Coptic sources claim it was Antioch in present-day Turkey. Some Latin sources state that Alexandria in Egypt was their place of martyrdom. They also disagree about the date of their martyrdom. Greek sources say that they were martyred during the reign of Antoninus Pius or Diocletian, while the Roman martyrology states that it was in the 3rd century they met their death. The Catholic Church commemorates her on May 14th, while the Eastern Orthodox Church commemorates them on 11/11. And we'll see this relationship to May 14th and 11/11 again and again. She is in connection with superstitions involving money, as in gambling and treasure hunting. Corona means crown. And what is a crown? It's the royal crown, an ornament for the head as a symbol of sovereignty. The Greek korone meaning anything curved, a kind of crown, from the Proto-Indo-European root skur, to turn or bend, as in the bending of palm trees perhaps. The Greek word korone means crow or raven, and you can see some of my previous videos about the relationship of the crow and coronavirus. Metaphorically, all kinds of curved or hooked-formed objects could be the shape of the beak or the claws of the bird. Compare the Latin corax, crow, as a hooked engine of war. Corax, the raven, is also the first stage of the 7 initiations of the cult of Mithras. Here's the corax. And we'll see more evidence of the cult of Mithras throughout the story. Figuratively, corona means regal power, a crowning honor or distinction. It's also the top part of the skull, where the crown chakra is. Corona also means coin, bearing the imprint of a crown or a crowned head. It's the name of a monetary unit, as in the krona in Scandinavia, the kroner. She is Saint coin. In that capacity, she is intimately tied with Janus, because Janus invented crowns as well as coins. And we will go into her relationship later, in a later video perhaps, her relationship with Janus. So this media blitz started around the spring equinox last year. There were many articles about her. This character, Father Richard Pagano, was her biggest cheerleader. And this interview even came out on her feast day, May 14th. He's quoted as saying, "Saint Corona is a very, very powerful witness." A witness is another name for martyr. This was the picture that really got my attention. This young Jesuit priest caressing the globus cruciger on top of her shrine in surgical gloves. And we see the medical element coming in. It's almost like the reign of the medical industry is intimately tied in with Saint Corona. The treasury of the cathedral in Aachen was recently preparing an exhibition about goldcraft. One of the pieces they were restoring is a reliquary of Saint Corona in gold, bronze, and ivory. Corona's relics came to Aachen in 997 with the Emperor Otto III, who had them transferred from the Italian city of Tricoli. Since that time, the veneration of Saint Corona spread all over Europe. Again, this is around March 26th. And a quote from the article, "Saint Corona is not the namesake of the virus. The Latin word corona means crown, an indication of the young saint had achieved the crown of eternal life because of the steadfastness of her faith. The connection with the coronavirus, named because of the crown-like structure, is just a coincidence." His name is Luke Jonathan Kappa, and Kappa happens to be a Hebrew personal name derived from Jacob, meaning supplanter. Who is the supplanter, and what is he supplanting? Someone or something taking place of another, as through force, scheming, strategy, or the like. This is the sign of the Murano or crypto Jew. And this is another Freemasonic hand sign, Birgitta Falk, the Aachen Cathedral treasurer. Here they are, another photo opportunity. Around 45 employees worked on this very detailed piece for almost a year. Falk says in a description on the cathedral website, the workshop almost went bankrupt in view of the efforts and costs. Why is this saint so important to Aachen Cathedral? Again, there is no relationship between Saint Corona and coronavirus, but she is adored in southern Germany as a patron saint against animal plagues. Aachen Cathedral is a Roman Catholic church in Aachen, Germany, one of the oldest cathedrals in Europe. It was constructed by order of Emperor Charlemagne, who was buried there in 814. From 936 to 1531, its Palatine Chapel saw the coronation of 33 German kings and 12 queens. Here is his portrait by Albrecht Dürer, and you can see he is forever coded with the number 14, which is St. Corona's number. The Hasmonean eagle from the royal dynasty in Jerusalem, Judas Maccabeus is his ancestor. The hammer, the same with his grandfather Charles Martel, was also called the hammer. He's a priest king. The lily is also a symbol of Jerusalem, among other things. But we'll see how the Holy Roman Empire became holy when the priestly families of Jerusalem took over. And this is the all-seeing eye on the gate of Aachen Cathedral with its corona. The salient point about Aachen Cathedral is its octagonal dome called the Palatine Chapel. And it has a hexahedron around it, the 16-sided hexadecahedron, which I believe Corona's age echoes. She's always 16 when she's martyred. It's the octagon. Legend has it that King Otto III brought Corona's relics to Aachen in 997 with the express purpose of building a joint Jesus and Saint Corona chapel. He died before the project could be completed. They were initially kept in a lead casket underneath a slab in the cathedral floor for hundreds of years before they were moved to the shrine in the early 20th century. Here is the slab with her name on it. Could this be symbolizing cryptocurrency in the crypt? The shrine is significantly 216 pounds for your 666. In 1911, the relics were removed from the crypt and placed in a shrine inside the cathedral, carefully stored away until the year 2020, when by pure coincidence her shrine reappears with the advent of the coronavirus. She was moved from lead to gold in a very alchemical symbology. Here's another German article around that same time. However, the very first report of Saint Corona came out on March 11th. And that is the same day that the WHO announced the global pandemic. WHO Director General's opening remarks at the media briefing on COVID-19, March 11th. For your 33. Trump also announced the pandemic on March 11th. March 11th is significant to the Templars. King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Templars, had Jacques de Molay and many other French Templars arrested in 1307 and tortured into making false confessions. When Molay later retracted his confession, Philip had him burned upon a scaffold on an island in the River Seine in front of the Notre Dame Cathedral on March 11th, 1314. Howard, a researcher at there'snothingnew.net, calls this the 311 mega ritual, and he ties it into Purim, which was on March 11th last year. Purim is from the Book of Esther, from the Akkadian Puru, meaning stone or urn, called the Festival of Lots. It's a Jewish holiday commemorating the saving of the Jewish people from Haman, an Achaemenid Persian Empire official who was planning to kill all the Jews. So you can read about that a little more yourself. This is definitely an area that I need to research a little bit more. But you can see that Purim is always on the 14th day of the Hebrew month of Adar. In 2020, that was March 11th. It's celebrated one day later inside the walled cities. Howard brings in the monument to the Great Fire of London, designed by Christopher Wren. Let's see, he says, Purim 3:11:20. Pur means the casting of lots for Marduk, the calf of the sun, or the golden calf. There are 311 steps to the coronavirus standing on top of the monument in London. And Revelations 3:11, "Behold, I am coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, that no one may take your crown." This is a very interesting discussion about Purim, and this is the author Jason Reza Georgiani, who wrote a book called Iranian Zionism. And it's all about the Babylon bankers. The Jewish shekel comes from the Persian shekelah, meaning the countenance of Darius. Some scholars say that the book of Esther was adapted to the stories of the pagan gods, Marduk becoming Mordecai and Ishtar transformed to Esther. And here's Esther, Ishtar, and the Second Temple. So Saint Corona, her feast day is May 14th. She is the May Queen of 14. All things 14 are related to Saint Corona. Let's have a look at how important this day was in history. Starting with May 14th, the Siege of Nicaea. This ties Saint Corona in with the Catholic military orders of knighthood, the Knights Templar, the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, the Knights Hospitaller, particularly significant in lieu of the medical martial law we're under, the hospital system. This is Godfrey de Bouillon, the first ruler of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. On May 14th, 1607, a group of roughly 100 members of a joint venture called the Virginia Company founded the first permanent English settlement in North America on the banks of the James River. So Jamestown was founded on May 14th, 1607. It was the first permanent English settlement in the Americas, started by the Merchants of Virginia Corporation out of London. It's significant that they chose May 14th as their first date. This is the baptism of Pocahontas in Jamestown. So, the conversion of the heathens was in Jamestown. The coronation of Louis XIV was also on May 14th. Of course, Code 14. The Sun King. His reign of 72 years and 110 days is the longest recorded of any monarch sovereign country in European history. I found this very fascinating. Dr. Jenner performs his first vaccination on James Phipps, a boy of age 8, on May 14th, 1796. Here is the etymology of vaccination. For the technique he publicized of preventing smallpox by injecting people with a similar but much milder cowpox virus, the variole vaccinae, from vaccine, pertaining to cows, from cows. Throughout the story, there's always a bovine at the bottom of it all. Here's a caricature of people concerned that they were going to grow cow-like appendages with the vaccine. Probably smarter than we thought. The statue of Edward Jenner at the entrance of the Jenner Institute in Oxford. Today they are developing the coronavirus vaccine. Coronavirus vaccine and May 14th. It's no coincidence. Christopher Wren was also instrumental in early inoculations. Injection as a legitimate medical tool was not truly explored until the 17th century. Christopher Wren performed the earliest experiments with crude hypodermic needles, performing intravenous injection into dogs in 1656. He used animal bladders as the syringe and goose quills as the needle to administer drugs such as opium. This is horrific. How could anyone think this has anything to do with health? It's torture. The U.S. Capitol is also intimately tied in with the May 14th date. The city of brotherly love became the ex-capital for several reasons, including a deal between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson and a compromise over slavery. The Sixth United States Congress recesses, and the process of moving the U.S. government from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. begins the following day. It was then called New Rome. Anthony Fauci could be called Mr. Washington, D.C. Just look at the numbers. They're an exact match. 87 and 61. And their reduction to 1111 and 14. 1111 and 14. This was from Gematria Effect News. The Lewis and Clark expedition also started out on May 14th. Started out with 42 men. They depart from Camp Dubois to join Meriwether Lewis at St. Charles, Missouri, marking the beginning of the Lewis and Clark expedition's historic journey up the Missouri River. This is Columbia, the female national personification of the United States, with the Mithraea cap, the god of contract law. Here we have another uniting of 1111 with May 14. The practice of the Day of Remembrance silence originates in Cape Town, South Africa, where there was a 2-minute silence initiated by the daily firing of the noonday gun on Signal Hill for a full year from May 14, 1918 to May 14, 1919, known as the 2-minute silent pause of remembrance. South African author and politician Sir Percy Fitzpatrick loved the idea and discussed it with Lord Milner, who talked about it with King George V, who adopted it for Great Britain. At the hour when the armistice came into force, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, there may be for the brief space of 2 minutes a complete suspension of all our normal activities. And of course, 1111 is the Orthodox Church feast day of St. Corona. The Rockefeller Foundation was founded on St. Corona Day in 1913. The charter for the Rockefeller Foundation is approved, which begins operations with a $100 million donation from John D. Rockefeller, the spearhead of our current medical imperialism. They did it by creating the field of public health. So your health is no longer your responsibility. It's the public's responsibility. The foundation was set up as a public relations solution to cover Standard Oil's antitrust crimes. It was Gates who suggested it to Rockefeller as a permanent corporate philanthropies for the good of mankind. Gates is a title. The board made its first grant of $100,000 to the American Red Cross to purchase property for its headquarters in Washington, D.C. So, always the Red Cross, following the Red Cross. It's the Templars. May 14th is also the Israeli Day of Declaration of Independence. It was 5 IR, the bull. Here's David Ben-Gurion declaring independence beneath a large portrait of Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism. So St. Corona is intimately tied in with Zionism, which of course started in Basel, Switzerland. In 1948, Israel is declared to be an independent state and a provisional government is established. Immediately after the declaration, Israel is attacked by the neighboring Arab states, triggering the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. And here's the Rockefeller Museum of Jerusalem, controlling the archaeological narrative. And is it an octagon? And finally, King Emmanuel Macron is coronated on May 14th, 2017. He's bloodline. He's pharaonic. He's probably a transformer. Here he is with Jacques Attali, his mentor, president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and proponent of world government, headquartered in Jerusalem. This is an interesting article you can read about their relationship. Some significant birthdays on May 14th. George Lucas, creator of the Star Wars franchise. Mark Zuckerberg. I don't think they assign this birthday to just anybody. And one could almost say that we live in a tranocracy. The Holy Roman Emperor Charles IV was also born on May 14th, and it was he who translated some of the relics of St. Corona from Feltre, Italy, to Prague. Last year, Pope Francis was to hold the Global Education Alliance at the Vatican on May 14th, 2020. However, it was postponed to October, supposedly. Last year, on May 14th, 2020, Jupiter went retrograde, which is significant in light of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that happened last year. The Sabian symbol for May 14th is a jewelry store filled with valuable gems, and it suggests abundance, riches, and treasures, but with a mercenary bent. May 14th happens to be the 134th day of the year in the Gregorian calendar. Exactly 231 days remain until the end of the year, right up until January 1st. 1-1, which is the day of Janus Geminus. So again, we see the marriage of Saint Corona and Janus in this number. She represents the plague. There is nothing in evil lower than plague. So May 14th starts the 231 gates right up until January 1st. Highly significant. So let's have a look at Saint Victor. He was martyred in Italy during the reign of Emperor Antoninus and Duke Sebastian in the year 160 for refusing to deny his faith in Christ. First they cut off his fingers, then they placed him in a lit furnace for 3 days, and he emerged unharmed. Then he was forced to drink deadly poison, but this did not harm him, causing the sorcerer who administered the deadly poison to believe in Christ. They then tore out his nerves and burned him in boiling oil. Then he was forced to drink ash mixed with vinegar, which was followed by the gouging out of his eyes and hanging him upside down for 3 days. After this he was skinned alive. Having endured such torture, the brave athlete delivered his soul into the hands of God. Saint Corona and Saint Victor symbolize together the victory of the crown. But whose crown? He is called Victor of Siena. His name is Vittore in Italian. In Coptic, he is Buktor. He is also known as Victor of Egypt, Victor of Thebes, Victorious and Victorinus. Here is a very androgynous portrayal of Victor in the church in Copenhagen. I believe he is a symbol of Miles, the soldier, in the third stage of the Mithraic initiation, upon whom the model of the Christian soldier is based. Why Siena? He is the patron saint of Siena, and Siena also happens to be the home of the oldest bank in the world, founded 550 years ago. Here is the building that it's headquartered in. Here is their logo. It's a mountain, the Mount of Piety. I've been reading this book, The Secret Society of Moses, very interesting book by Flavio Barbiero. Not quite finished yet, but it is fascinating. And here's what he has to say about the mountain symbology. It appears almost exclusively in central Italy in connection with the church. It's an indirect reference to the Temple of Jerusalem built at the top of Mount Moriah. The mountain is always depicted in groups of 3 or 6, arranged to form a triangle. It's an extremely transparent symbolism and alludes to the divinity to whom the Temple of Jerusalem was dedicated. So here is the top of Mount Moriah, now under the octagonal dome of the rock. It's where the Temple of Solomon was erected. Various great families closely linked to the church have these mountains as their symbol. It's no coincidence that the same symbol characterized a large number of Jewish families and also one of the greatest Italian banks, the oldest one, Monte dei Paschi of Siena. Here's the Siena Cathedral, and inside we have a painting of The Blinding of Saint Victor by Bartolomeo Bulgarini, 1351. For his depiction of the blinding of Saint Victor, the artist used the kiss of Judas as his formal model. Victor's martyrdom is thus linked in a prestige-enhancing manner with the Passion of Christ. Victor, Siena banking, tied in with the kiss of Judas and the 30 pieces of silver. The most poignant symbol of betrayal in the Christian world. What are they telling us? Here's a contemporary Mexican retablo of the gouged eye of Saint Victor and a broken crown. Well, again, whose crown is it? This is also Howard from there'snothingnew.net. Sovereignty means no higher authority. Switzerland is the only sovereign nation, home of the Knights Templar and Knights of St. John, the Chaldean sea beast, also known as the Hospitallers, the world's international bankers, Worldwide Intelligence Services, CIA, and CERN, Cernunnos, the Horned One, built over an ancient grotto of Apollo the Destroyer. The gnomes of Zurich are the secret chiefs, the Great White Brotherhood Aryans, or hidden directorate in control of the Vatican. The souls, and the City of London Corporation, the physical assets, enforced by Washington, D.C. and the U.S. military, all sovereign territories, free from respective national laws. Freedom from God, liberty from God, equality with God are the Gnostic hallmarks to instigate wars and revolutions. The Bank of International Settlements in Basel controls all central banks, including the U.S. Fed. Libra cryptocurrency will be controlled by elites based in Switzerland who have the authority to issue and destroy Libra cryptocurrency. Libra is the weigh scales of justice, sacred to the Babylonian sun god, sun lion, and god of justice, Shamash, currently replacing Jesus as the center candle of the Chabad Lubavitch Hanukkah menorah. Shamash is the golden calf of the sun worshipped by Israel since Exodus. National intelligence services, including the U.S. CIA, report to Switzerland the Holy Cross, X, the four quartered earth, 1441. The familiar motto, one for all and all for one. 41 is Switzerland's calling code, and the location in Basel of the first Zionist Congress in 1897, precisely 120 years in advance of the implementation of the Zionist New World Order. God warned of the pre-flood 120 years in advance of the flood. Methuselah, the eighth patriarch, died just ahead of the flood. The new covenant is the eighth and final covenant between God and man, and will end with the acceptance of the Antichrist, mark of the beast, and the strong delusion. The Essenes planned this event over 2,000 years ago. In the Prince of Melchizedek scroll, 10 jubilees after 1517 was 2017. The false Messiah will come soon. Does Saint Corona represent the false Messiah? Here is the Swiss Corona, the irony being that the Swiss were never a monarchy. It was always a confederation. This is the ceiling of the Swiss Federal Building with the Templar cross in the middle. One for all and all for one. 14 and 41, code 14. The Libra currency is now called diem, carpe diem. These are the gnomes of Zurich. It's a slang term for the Swiss bankers. Swiss bankers are popularly associated with extremely secretive policies, which gnomes in fairy tales live underground, in secret, counting their riches. Zurich is the commercial and financial center of Switzerland. So, is the crown a Phrygian cap? We'll see that the Roman Catholic mitre is based on the Phrygian cap. These gnomes emerged from medieval fascination with secrets of wealth, especially gold, buried underground and mined by mysterious beings. Goethe writes about them in his epic Faust. I got a lot of this information about Switzerland and their pharaonic bloodlines from this character, Dr. Sean Ross from South Africa. Is he an agent? Probably. But he has put out some very interesting videos, including this one, The Pharaoh Show, way back in 2012. This is another one of his YouTube channels you might check out. He does some very interesting work. He was a scholar of Egyptian demotic language, so he can read the symbology very well. This is kind of the working schematic with the pharaohs at the top, who then head to Judea, and from Judea, Rome, the Vatican, the Khazars, the Templars, the Swiss, founded in 1291, after the Templars were destroyed. Then they become the Jesuits, and the Masons, and the Illuminati, and finally the USA for the New World Order, the Novus Ordo Seclorum, the horizontal rule of the second and third sons versus the vertical rule of the firstborn sons. Horizontal rule, vertical rule, the octagon. Here we have Saint Corona with the two crowns, and it's a crown of thorns in the form of an octagon on the cross. Octagon, as Sean Ross says. So Saint Corona could also be called Saint Coin. As a saint, she is responsible for money, gambling, treasure hunting, butchers, grave diggers, lumberjacks in bad weather. She is also there, especially in Bavaria and Austria, to protect us from plagues. In her primary role of caring for money, she is often depicted wearing a crown, an ancient symbol for currencies. So follow the money, follow the monai. Here's Corona giving coin to the beggars. In his book, Magical Treasure Hunting in Europe and North America, Johannes Dillinger discusses Saint Corona. Corona is associated with superstitions involving money, such as gambling, treasure hunting, a result of a later treasure hunter who credited his success to invoking her. Saint Corona was called upon by a treasure hunter to bring treasure and then sent away through a similarly elaborate ritual. Treasure hunting and treasuries. Is it any wonder that the bankers venerate her? Traditionally, Saint Christopher is the patron saint of treasure hunting. As one of the 14 holy helpers, he is also protected travelers and was prayed to specifically to ward off plague. So 14 ties Saint Corona into these 14 holy helpers. This group of Nothelfer, or helpers in need, originated in the 14th century in the Rhineland, largely as a result of the epidemic known as the Black Death, probably bubonic plague, and probably another hoax. I believe all plagues are hoaxes. Here are the 14 holy helpers. Each one of them has a fascinating story. I wish I could go into them all. Hagiotherapy is the medieval practice of using religious relics, prayers, and pilgrimages in an attempt to alleviate sickness. Here in the Basilica of Vierzehnheiligen, the 14 helpers. Pardon my German. But this also ties into the Red Cross. You can read that story for yourself. Saint Christopher was invoked in treasure magic with so-called Christopher rituals, or the Christopher prayers. A number of German dialects even had the verb Christopheln to Christopher, which means to use magic in order to find a treasure. Saint Christopher, we give you an undying treasure, our souls. Now give us a treasure of money. As Johannes Dillinger explains, some prayers send Saint Christopher away ritually after he had helped them to find their treasure. Such ritual dismissals were typical elements of magical formulae used to conjure up demons. The Christopher prayer was largely regarded as blasphemous, with the clergy claiming that treasure seekers indiscriminately called upon Saint Christopher as well as upon the biblical demon Ashtaroth, the great Duke of Hell. This is the Corona prayer from Styria, the part of Austria close to Hungary, written in 1794. Like the Christopher prayer, she is ritually dismissed, again highlighting the dangerous nature of invoking these saints. Saints and demons were completely exchangeable in the conjuration of treasure hunters. Holy Martyr Corona, I, a poor sinner, ask you to remember your great mercy and honor and your control over the treasures of the world. And whoever asks you in the name of Jesus Christ, your dear bridegroom, in his name you have power to give worldly goods to me, a poor and needy person. So I beg you with all of my humble heart, O Virgin, O Martyr Corona, relieve me from my needs and my poverty by giving me 50,000 florins of good gold for the salvation of my soul through the redemption of my needy body. Now go away in the peace of God. which shall be between you and me. Go back to the place where you came from. The eternal peace of God shall be and shall stay forever between you and me, and you will come again when I wish to see you. Now go away and be blessed through God and his holy 5 wounds, and go away in the peace of God, and the blessing be between you and me and mine. Amen. Welcome back to part 2 of this St. Corona series. I must admit that my thoughts and ideas are still incomplete and somewhat underdeveloped. But given my May 14th deadline, I just had to get this information out. If I hadn't imposed this deadline, the story would never get told, because this research never ends. I'm hoping that that some of my more astute viewers can help me with my current blind spots. So let's proceed. Most versions of St. Corona's life have her martyred in the year 170 AD. Emperor Aurelius was dealing with a deadly Antonine plague for which the Christians were blamed. In the following persecution, St. Victor and St. Corona were tortured and killed. So here is the Antonine plague, also called the Plague of Galen. It was an ancient pandemic brought to the Roman Empire by troops who were returning from campaigns in the Near East. So these fake plagues always come from the East. Some think it was either smallpox or the measles. Let's see. In 169, Marcus Aurelius was the co-regent. The 2 emperors had risen to the throne by virtue of being adopted by the previous emperor, Antoninus Pius. And as a result, their family name, Antoninus, has become associated with the pandemic. I'm wondering if that's why Anthony Fauci was given the name Antony. Is he from gens Antonia? It was legions along the Rhine, which is where Aachen Cathedral is. Here's Marcus Aurelius Antoninus in the Marcomannic Wars against the Germanic tribes along the Danube frontier in the early 170s AD. And this Danube frontier is notable because that's where most of the Mithraea have been found. They number 420 in total for your code 42. Again, Mithras shows its head. Here's Marcus Aurelius celebrating his triumph over Rome's enemies in 176 AD, riding in a quadriga chariot. And this is the mosaic in Beth Alpha synagogue with Sol Invictus Mithraeus in the center, in a quadriga. The quadriga is a symbol of Heliodromus, the 6th stage in the initiation rites of Mithras. His symbols are the whip, the radiant halo, and the torch, just like the androgynous Statue of Liberty. Also, a globe in the left hand was symbolic of Heliodromus. And Mithras enjoyed a sacred meal before ascending to heaven, and this is mirrored in the Last Supper of Christ and commemorated with the Eucharist. So what exactly is a martyr? A martyr is someone who suffers persecution and death for advocating, renouncing, refusing to renounce, or refusing to advocate a religious belief or cause as demanded by an external party. The blood of martyrs is the seed of Christians, said Tertullian, the father of Latin Christianity. The Church was born out of the persecutions and martyrdom of its first members. So I wonder what the real inspiration was if these martyrs were fictional, which I believe they were. Here's the Roman martyrology, the 14th day of May, describing Victor and Corona. A martyrology is a catalog or list of martyrs and other saints and beati, arranged in the calendar order of their anniversaries or feasts. The Roman martyrology lists each of the martyrs on his or her dies natalis, or birthday into eternal life. That's why they celebrate it with a feast or a festival. In 1582, Pope Gregory VIII decreed a revision of the Julian calendar, creating a new system, what we call the Gregorian calendar. The first printed edition appeared at Rome a year later in 1583. One could almost call it the propaganda arm of the new Gregorian calendar. A martyr is a date. Here's Pope Gregory VIII. He commissioned the Gregorian calendar, initially authored by the doctor astronomer Aloysius Lilius and aided by Jesuit priest astronomer Christopher Clavius, who made the final modifications. So the Gregorian calendar is just a huge Jesuit project, of course, and they have to throw the globe in with it just for good measure. So Saint Corona in the Orthodox Church is also known as Stephana, Stephanida, or Stephanie. Stephanie is the female name from the Greek Stephanos, meaning crown. Stephan means crown. Here are some verses from the Greek Orthodox. To Victor, without cowardice, Victor proceeded towards the sword, for all cowardice is distanced by your shining heart. To Stephanie, Stephanie is bound to a palm tree by which the martyr blossomed like a date palm. The Stephanos, Greek for crown, is also called the mitre. It's the purely liturgical headgear customary today for the bishops and patriarchs of many Orthodox and Catholic Eastern churches. The Stephanos is modeled on the imperial crown of the late Byzantine Empire. So here are some examples of the Stephanos: Armenian, Russian. So the mitre used to refer to the headband worn by women. It was a mark of effeminacy. It was the headdress of a priest of Hercules as well as the headdress of a Jewish high priest. It was developed from the Phrygian cap, or the Phrygium. Here's a Phrygium. Here's another Phrygian cap of sorts by Bezalel, who was the artisan of all the instruments inside the Jewish tabernacle in the desert. Here's Mithras with his Phrygian cap. And here's the Phrygian cap of the gnomes of Zurich. Whose crown is it? Saint Stephen is the very first Christian martyr, the proto-martyr. And his name means crown, and by extension reward, honor, renown, and fame. Stephen is often given as a title rather than as a name. The Stephanos HaKadosh in Hebrew. He was, according to the Acts of the Apostles, a deacon in the early church in Jerusalem, who angered members of various synagogues by his teachings. Accused of blasphemy, at his trial he made a speech denouncing the Jewish authorities who were sitting in judgment on him, and was then stoned to death. His martyrdom was witnessed by Saul of Tarsus, also known as Paul. And I believe Paul was involved in the stoning of Saint Stephen. He's also the patron saint of Masons. Interestingly, Anthony Fauci's middle name is Stephen. I believe it is a title. He is Jesuit trained in high school and university. And many of you know by now, Fauci is the Sicilian word for sickle. And the sickle of Saturn and the Phrygian cap of Mithras, the staff and ring, are all symbols of the seventh and final Mithraic grade, the Pater, Saturn. One could almost call him Antoninus Crown Sickle. He's very high up. Going even deeper, we find out that Anthony Fauci is Swiss. This is his maternal grandfather, Giovanni Abbes, born in Chur, Switzerland, 1876. This is the Abbes coat of arms. The Abbes viper monarch. Abyss means deep or seemingly bottomless chasm, the regions of hell conceived of as a bottomless pit, Satan's dark abyss. I got this information from this recent article. Very interesting read. Highly suggest you taking a look at it. And if you just want to listen to the article, the author of the article, an interview with him, you can listen to the Mike and Doug show. The Abyss of Humanity. So the Abbes family were Swiss mining, trading, war minister, banking, medical, academia, engineering, transport. Family crest from 1589. It's the crowned viper laden with buckets of gold devouring a grisling child. Grisling means crying or screaming, wailing. Here are some various spellings on the Abbes family. They originally lived in Puro, in North Lombardia, Italy, which was originally Switzerland, home of the House Abyss. Way up here on the border between Switzerland and Italy. The Abbes mining of talc, gold, silver, and coal and uranium caused the worst landslide in recorded history on September 4th, 1618, wiping out the entire town of 2,500 people. The family then fled to Chur, Switzerland, and Kyrgyzstan, which is known as the Switzerland of Asia, and continued mining for another century. This avalanche is remembered as the Rodi Avalanche. In the article, he describes this entity that I've never heard of before, the Pilgrim Society. I'm going to have to look more into it. But he says that the British Pilgrim Society and its London bankers started 2 world wars to subdue and control the Swiss banking and trade strongholds, then invited their fellow Swiss and German Satanist elites, including the Habsburgs, to join them once they were tamed, like Klaus Schwab, who happens to be a cousin of Anthony Fauci's. Here is the Abbes family tree summary, all the way down to Anthony Fauci and his 3 daughters. Curiously, the Abbes family in Puro had adopted the city of Milan Biscione symbol as the crowned viper, eating a grisling human child. The Abbes crest added the yoke and buckets of gold in the 15th century. So instead of the serpent on a vertical pole, we have the serpent on a horizontal pole, which Dr. Sean Ross explains is the vertical rule of the New World Order. The horizontal rule of the New World Order. The vertical rule would be that of the firstborn son of royalty taking all, the primogenitor. And now you have the second, third, and fourth born sons taking their turns through fake elections. That's the New World Order, horizontal rule, as far as I understand. I wonder too if this yoke was added because of this incident. This is the Helvetians forced the Romans to pass under the yoke, celebrating the Tigerini Helvetii, Proto-Swiss victory over the Romans at Aachen in 107 BC, under De Vico's command. Here is the yoke, and the Romans are passing under it. Sean Ross also explains that Helvetica, the Proto-Helvetians, is a combination of Hel, the Norse goddess of the underworld, and Vatica, the Etruscan goddess of the underworld. The goddess Vatica was the lord of the underworld, underground, the dead, and dwelt on Vatican Hill, which was the Etruscan. Before the Romans and before the appearance of the Vatican Hill, it was not a necropolis. It was later built on the Cathedral of St. Peter. It turned out that the Vatican is the name of the Etruscan cemetery. Helvetica. Helvetian. So after the horrific landslide, the Abbess family moved to Chur, Switzerland, and that is in the canton Graubünden, and that translates as the Grey Leagues. They are the Greys that rule over us. Chur is the capital of Graubünden, and that also happens to be where Davos is located. Davos is 15 linear miles from Chur, practically in the backyard of the ancient Fauci family of Abbess. Let's have a look at where the Biscione came from. It was derived from the Latin bestia, the beast. It was originally the coat of arms for the House of Visconti, the lords and dukes of Milan. The city of Bellinzona also has the Biscione. They're in the capital of the Swiss canton, Ticino. So here's Bellinzona. Right up here is about where Puro was, and then they moved to Chur in Graubünden. Bellinzona is linked with the Gotthard Tunnel. This is the bronze serpent brought to Milan from Constantinople in the 11th century, today in the Basilica of St. Ambrose. It's thought to have inspired the Biscione. And I just put this in here to show how Otto III is very much linked with this whole area. Otto III, you'll remember, is the Holy Roman Emperor who brought St. Corona's relics to Aachen Cathedral in 997. Supposedly, this is the very same bronze snake that was erected by Moses in the desert to protect and heal the Israelites. Here you have the Templar cross right underneath it. We find this information in Numbers 21:6 for your 216 again, 216, 666. And Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on the standard, and it came about that if a serpent bit any man when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. I wonder if this has anything to do with Agenda 21. Agenda Numbers 21. Here's Michelangelo's image of the Israelites' deliverance from the plague in the Sistine Chapel. So this snake is said to have been brought to the Basilica of St. Ambrose in Milan from Constantinople in the year 1000, a gift of the Byzantine Emperor Basil II to the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III. Otto III, Saint Corona, coronavirus, bronze serpent. It's all related. This is the interior of the basilica. the Archbishop Arnolfo erected the snake in the basilica on a column, arousing local superstition, so a second column was erected as a corrective. So here you have the bronze serpent on a pillar and the cross on a pillar, the two pillars, which of course brings to mind John 3:1-4. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. I'm very attuned to 3:14 because I believe May is the true third month, if March was the first month, and May 14th is the true Pi Day, 3:14. Here's the exterior of St. Ambrose Basilica. Even St. Victor shows up in this basilica, in the Ciel d'Oro, the golden ceiling of San Vittore. Let's have a look at this name, Ambrose, from Ambrosios, immortal, belonging to the immortals, Ambrosia, Saint Ambrose. It's the favored food or drink of the gods. The Greek ambrosia, food of the gods, of the immortals, ambrosia, immortal, imperishable. It's the food of the gods. I believe this child is the ambrosia. They're living off the I don't even know. I can hardly wrap my head around it. The adrenochrome, the blood, cannibalism. Who knows? Who knows what these creatures are up to? This is even called the Ambrose Cross of Milan. The Ambrose Cross, the St. Michael's Cross, St. George's Cross. And you have their marriage in the Alfa Romeo logo. This is St. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, one of the 4 doctors of the Church, along with St. Gregory the Great, St. Augustine, and St. Jerome. This is the Devil's Column outside of St. Ambrose Church, with 2 holes pierced by the devil's horns in frustration that he could not tempt St. Ambrose. I believe that the bronze serpent is the syringe. It's the vaccine. This is a monument of the bronze serpent on Mount Nebo in front of the Church of St. Moses, where Moses viewed the promised land he would never enter. It even looks like a syringe. And are people not worshiping the vaccine? Absolutely worshiping it, along with Dr. Fauci. It's called the Nehushtan, the great snake, the great serpent, or the great brass. The syringe even hisses. It's the susurration. Brazen means to harden, to braze, to solder, to expose to the action of fire. This is the hypodermic needle based on the cobra fang. And here they are, soldering their bronze serpents. The bronze serpent. Here's Fauci, Queen of the Abyss, holding his globus cruciger, just like Venus Urania, and even Mithras holding the celestial globe. 666, 666. They worship this globe. I will see you soon for part 3. Welcome back to the 3rd and final installment of this St. Corona series. I almost left off making this part 3 due to my very limited understanding of the ideas presented here. So much more work still needs to be done, of course. But again, I'm hoping that some feedback will help me to develop these ideas further. So now we're going to have a look at St. Corona's particularly gruesome method of execution, that of being torn apart by two trees. And it turns out it's somewhat of a literary trope. First we have Emperor Aurelian, who reigned from 270 to 275 A.D. He had a reputation for strictness to the point where if his soldiers seduced the wives of their hosts, he would subject them to being torn apart by two trees. It was rumored that his wife Ulpia had cheated on him, which is why he had such a hatred for his own soldiers for luring women from their husbands who were at war. And this is a beer label. The beer is called Torn Apart by Trees, from Nightmare Brewing Company, and it rather gives a new light into the beer virus, so-called. I guess this method of execution is a Persian one. After the defeat of Darius III by Alexander the Great, the Persian monarchy was thrown into turmoil and Darius was killed. One man, Bessus, claimed the throne as Artaxerxes V, but in 329 BC, Alexander had him executed. The manner of Bessus's death is disputed. He may have been crucified or torn apart by recoiling trees, or what is most likely, mutilated before being sent to Ecbatana for execution. This is James Justin Morier, and he was a British diplomat and author noted for his novels about the Kahar dynasty in Iran, most famously for the Haji Baba series. The method of tying people to bent down trees, which are then allowed to recoil, ripping the individual to pieces in the process, is mentioned by several travelers in the 19th century to Persia. The British diplomat James Justin Morier traveled to a special envoy to the Shah in 1808, and Morier writes the following concerning the prevailing criminal justice. For the king never pardons theft and orders a convicted thief to be executed instantly. The mode is as follows. 2 young trees are by main strength brought together at their summits, and there fastened with cords together. The culprit is then brought out, and his legs are tied with ropes, which are again carried up and fixed to the top of the trees. The cords that force the trees together are then cut, and in the elasticity and power of this spring, the body of the thief is torn asunder, and left to thus hang divided on each separate tree. The inflexibility of the king on this point has given to the roads a security which in former times was little known. Here is the Lion of Judah in Iran. Morier was the son of Isaac Morier, and he is a Swiss-born merchant, educated in London, and he became an agent of the East India Company, and he died from the plague in Constantinople. This is the Levant Company, which is an English chartered company formed in 1592 by Elizabeth I, and approved in its initial charter on September 11th, 1592, when the Venice Company and the Turkey Company merged. It regulated the English trade with the Ottoman Empire and the Levant. They were called Turkey merchants, so these are white men going native. This is the Levant. It includes Damascus and Syria, all areas of St. Corona. I believe these Turkey merchants were embodying the 5th stage of the Mithraic initiation, that of Persis the Persian. And you can read about it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the semen of the bull is taken and purified. Symbols are the sickle The sickle is a symbol of Saturn, the divine reaper. Again, September 11th. Why is that so important? It's very important to the city of Zurich, the financial center of Switzerland, because their patron saints, Felix and Regula, have their feast day on September 11th. See, Felix and Regula were members of the Theban Legion under Saint Maurice, who came from Egypt. They were a legion of Christian soldiers. They were stationed in the canton of Valais, Switzerland. When the legion was to be executed in 286, they fled, reaching Zurich before they were caught, tried, and executed. After decapitation, they miraculously stood on their feet and picked up their own heads, walked 40 paces uphill, and prayed before lying down in death. They were buried on the spot where they lay down, on the hilltop, which would become the site of the Grossmünster Church. In the Coptic calendar of Alexandria, Egypt, the first day of the year is Tho I, or September 11th in the Gregorian calendar. Zurich is among the world's largest financial centers despite having a relatively small population. Most Swiss banks have their headquarters in Zurich. And the irony is, I was in Zurich on September 11th, 2001. We also find this form of dismemberment in the Theseus cycle of Greek mythology, in the character of Sinis, the pine bender, or Pitiocamptes. And palm trees and pine trees are both evergreens. Theseus was the mythical king and founder hero of Athens. He's most famous for the slaying of the Minotaur. His mother, Aethra, slept with Aegeus, the goat man, and Poseidon in the same night, giving Theseus both a divine and mortal nature. After retrieving his father's sandals and sword from under a rock, he set off from Troezen to Athens to claim his birthright. He follows the dangerous path around the Saronic Gulf, where he encounters a string of 6 entrances to the underworld, each guarded by a chthonic enemy, or spirit of the underworld. The Saronic Gulf is a string of 6 entrances to the underworld, each guarded by a chthonic enemy in the shape of a thief or a bandit, named for the mythological king Sauron of Troezen. At the Isthmian entrance to the underworld was a bandit named Sinis, often called Pitiocamptes, he who bends pine trees. He would capture travelers, tie them between 2 pine trees that were bent down to the ground, and then let the trees go, tearing his victims apart. Theseus slew him by his own method. He then seduced Sinis's daughter, Perigune, fathering the child Melanippus. This is Perigune, the beautiful daughter of Sinis, a.k.a. Perigenia, in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dreams. After Theseus killed her father, she hid herself in a bed of rushes and asparagus. Theseus rapes her. She later bore Theseus's first male heir, Melanippus, who became the ancestor of the Ioxids of Caria. Here's a depiction of Saint Corona being strung upside down between 2 pine trees. You don't see that very often. And here is Pitiocamptes. So the bent evergreen seems to be a portal to the underworld. Sinis was called the Isthmian bandit. The word isthmus comes from the ancient Greek word for neck and refers to the narrowness of the land. So here is the isthmus and the canal. Taurus happens to rule the neck, and the glyph of Taurus represents the neck. You see here in the old astrological man, Taurus rules the neck. Taurus rules the neck. Taurus is the isthmus. The Isthmian portal to the underworld, perhaps. This is the Hyades within Taurus, and we also have the hyoid bone in our neck. Happens to be 153 light years away, so they tell us. They just want to encode 153, which is a very significant number, and we'll get to that later. And they even call these horns in the hyoid bone. It reminded me of the canton Uri in Switzerland. So I drew it up, and I had some more information about Uri. And I found this. Orion was born when the three gods Zeus, Poseidon, and Hermes urinated on a bull hide and buried it in the earth to provide King Hyrieus with a son. The boy was named Orion after the urine, but was also known by the name Candaon. Here's Orion. It just made me think that it probably has to do with the steroids in the urine. And Mithras is always with the bull. Here's the androgynous Mithra. The nymphus, the male bride stage of Mithras, the second stage of initiation. And sure enough, there are urinary steroids from the bull, and also the sperm of the bull. And you see in the tauroctony of Mithras, there's always a scorpion stinging the testicles of the bull. It's called trenbolone esters for their muscle building and otherwise performance enhancing effects. I think this cult of Mithras has a lot to do with the transgender agenda. You have the 6 and the 5, the 6 and the 5, and even the coat of arms, the 6 and the 5 stars, the 6-pointed stars. It's the 4 red giants of the Hyades with Aldebaran. This is an illustration from Fox's Book of Martyrs showing the papists torturing Protestants, in this case being torn apart by trees. And you don't often see them hung this way, but I thought that was rather interesting. And here are a couple examples of St. Corona being hung this way and not vertically. This one's from the Ortenburg Samurai Church in Lower Bavaria, Patriching Church. Another painting of St. Corona from Staudach, Lower Bavaria. I thought this one was very interesting. This is the altarpiece from the Corona Kirche in Copenhagen. I just cannot imagine going to church every Sunday and staring up at this torture of Saint Corona. Here are the 2 crowns being brought down to her. This is a rather glorious picture of Saint Corona in the Oberndorf district. Altenkirchen altar. We will encounter these bent tree portals again in the myths of Inanna and the Hulupu tree, another portal to the underworld. The Hulupu tree is the home to the Anzu bird, and Anzu in Feltre, Italy is one of the homes of Corona's relics. We'll have to get to that in a later video. There's another bent palm tree, or the Irminsul. This is in the Externstein relief, a medieval depiction of the descent of the cross, Nicodemus stands on a bent palm tree as he helps lower Jesus from the crucifix. The Irminsul is the Old Saxon great pillar, was a sacred pillar-like object in the Germanic paganism of the Saxons. It was destroyed by Charlemagne during the Saxon Wars. Excuse me. Now, the book of the Fasti is a Latin poem by Ovid, published in 8 A.D., and it explains the origins of the Roman holidays associated with the customs. So the Fasti is to the Julian calendar what the Roman martyrology was to the Gregorian calendar. This one is pagan. The martyrology was Christian. So in the May 14th entrance, we have the day before the Ides is marked by Taurus lifting his starry muzzle, the signs explained by a familiar tale. And he goes into the story of Jupiter and Europa, as well as Io. It represents the white bull from the sea, the glinting red eyes, the star of Aldebaran. May 14th, the sun was rising conjunct the head of the bull at this date. Taurus itself would therefore not be visible, but was indeed raising its head. This is the heliacal rising of Aldebaran. The star rise of a star occurs annually when it first becomes visible above the eastern horizon at dawn, just before sunrise, thus becoming the morning star, after it has spent a season behind the sun, rendering it invisible. Astrologically, Aldebaran was a fortunate star, portending riches and honor, consistent with Saint Corona being the patron saint of treasure. This star is one of the 4 royal stars of the Persians from around 3000 BC. Here's another depiction of Taurus from Hevelius. Aldebaran is the right eye, Ain is the left eye. These are the 4 Persian royal stars, and they represent the fixed cross of astrology. Here they are overlaid on Metatron's cube. Saint Michael represents Aldebaran, and Archangel Uriel represents Antares. This flag, the red cross, is actually the flag of Archangel Michael, the same one in the judgment card, number 20, in the tarot deck. Here is Aldebaran and Antares. Aldebaran representing spring equinox, and autumn equinox is represented by Antares. This is Cautes and Cautapates from the Tauroctony of Mithras. Here they are down here. So Aldebaran is God's eye with the corona, the eye of revelation, the portal to the mysteries of the mind. And Antares would be the star of anger, pride, and revenge, the portal to the mysteries of the heart. Aldebaran, designated Alpha Tauri, and abbreviated to Alpha Tau. It is the brightest star in Taurus, and generally the 14th brightest star in the night sky. The 14 again. Alpha Tauri, or Alpha Tau, is the Alpha and the Omega. I am the first and the last, and beside me there is no God. On March 11th, 509, a lunar occultation of Aldebaran was observed in Athens, Greece. The astronomer Edmund Halley studied the timing of this event, and in 1718, he concluded that Aldebaran must have changed position since that time, moving several minutes of arc further to the north. This led to the discovery of proper motion. So this lunar occultation of Aldebaran Is it the sickle and the star of the Muslims, of Islam? Is this representing the lunar occultation of Aldebaran? This also ties it into the 311 mega ritual. Aldebaran is the eye of God, the eye of illumination. The traditional name of Aldebaran derives from the Arabic for Aldebaran, meaning the follower, because it seems to follow the Pleiades. I think that there's a deeper etymology to this, but I haven't found it yet. "4,500 years ago, the location of the equinox was in the middle of the Golden Gate of the ecliptic. Does anybody remember this song by the Rolling Stones, 2,000 Light Years from Home? I never really looked at the lyrics before, but in the last verse, "Bell Flight 14, you now can land. Seen you on Aldebaran." What are they talking about? Axel Stoll was a far-right, esoteric German geophysicist and conspiracy theorist. He thought that the Aryan race actually are aliens from the star Aldebaran, and that the Earth is a jail planet for those who did wrong. In his opinion, all races are fighting for superiority. I don't know anything about this person, but I thought that was rather interesting, and everything I saw about him was in German, so I don't really know exactly what he's saying. The May 14th entry in Book 5 of the Fasti continues. "On this day, too, the Vestals throw effigies made of rushes in the form of old men from the Oak Bridge. When the land was Saturnia, Jove prophetically said something like this: 'Throw 2 people into the Tuscan River as a sacrifice to the sickle-bearing ancient.'" Ovid is directly talking to the river Tiber, who is crowned in reeds, and he explains what exactly is happening. "I saw this place when it was grassland without walls. Cattle were scattered, grazing on either bank, and Tiber, whom the nations know and fear, were disregarded then even by the cattle. Arcadian Evander is often named to you. A stranger, he churned my waters with his oars. Hercules came here too, with a crowd of Greeks. My name was Albula then, if I remember true. Evander, hero from Palantium, received him warmly, and Cacus had the punishment he deserved. The victor left, taking the cattle, his plunder from Erythea, with him, but his friends refused to go any further. Most of them had come from the deserted Argos. They established their hopes in houses on our hills, yet sweet love for their native land often stirred them. One of them, in dying, gave this brief command: 'Throw me into the river Tiber that carried by Tiber's waves my spiritless dust might journey to the Inachian shore.' That funeral duty laid on him displeased his heir. The dead stranger was buried in the Italian ground, and a rush effigy was thrown into the Tiber instead. To return to his Greek home over the wide waters, Tiber spoke, entering a moist cave of natural stone, while you, gentle waters, checked your flow." So this is called the ritual of the Argi, and the Argi are the Greeks who came with Hercules and Evander. Here is Hercules killing the fire-breathing Cacus, son of Vulcan, who'd stolen his cattle. It's ritual purification of the city and human sacrifice to Saturn, so May 14th is tied into this notion of human sacrifice. Tiber was the son of Janus and Camasene, a nymph. It was from the Tiberinus that the river Tiber gained his name. Prior to that, the river was known as Albula. which means the white. Following Tiberinus's death in the river on its banks, however, its name was changed. In another myth about Janus, Saturn, after being exiled by Jupiter from the heavens, arrives in Janiculum, the city founded by Janus on a ship. The god was received warmly by Janus, and in return for his hospitality bestowed on the king the power to see both into the future and into the past. So, in the future, I would like to go into the relationship of Janus and Saint Corona, but that will have to be for another time. Thank you very much for joining me thus far, and hope to see you soon.